Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I have a beautiful dive watch from Dan Henry to review, and I bought this watch a few weeks ago and received it about a week ago. Now I spoke about this watch a few weeks ago in one of my videos, speaking about how good value I thought this watch was, and after reviewing the watch and trying it on for a week and wearing it daily, I still hold those beliefs. Now, this watch is, in my opinion, one of the most authentic super-compressors on the market, because it has the true super-compressor design of non-screw-down crowns that become tighter under pressure, whereas a lot of more expensive watches, which follow that double crown design, don't. So I think for $250 with an automatic movement, 200-meter water resistance, and this super-compressor style, not to mention fantastic build quality and a beautiful engraving on the back, I think this watch offers a really impressive package for the money. So without further ado, this is the box the watch comes in, which is a fairly generic plastic knurled box in this cylindrical shape, with Dan Henry on the front here, as you can see on this polished piece of plastic. Now, personally, I don't think this does the vintage watch very much justice, but that said, it does protect the watch during shipping and protects it if you want to store it. But the watch actually comes in this beautiful khaki canvas and distressed leather watch roll, and this is no leatherette. This is true leather, and feels it. Now, then it's bound together with this very nicely finished canvas style string, which has been waxed to give it further resistance, and it simply unrolls like so, and then can be easily undone like this. Now this can then be opened up, as you can see, to then show the way this packet works. And this can in fact hold 3 watches in fair safety, due to the fact that it includes these leather pouches, these pockets here, which are, again, distressed leather and of very high quality. One can feel the quality, surrounded by this canvas. Now, I'm afraid it's very difficult to get this into the camera due to the sheer size of it, but on this side, one sees the Dan Henry warranty card, and is an international warranty, so wherever you live you will be able to use the warranty. And it's interesting, it has this sort of pattern on it, this geometric pattern, which I personally find very appealing. And I know this is just the warranty card, but little details like this really do spark my interest and make me appreciate the brand more. Now, as you can see, the back of this is a simple dark green with the sort of serial number and so on, and the 1-year warranty, which is a reasonable length for a watch of this type. Then the watch is stowed in here, and as you can see, this is the watch itself, this beautiful super-compressor, with a nice domed crystal and automatic movement. So I'll just put the packaging to one side and be back with you to show you this wristwatch. So, here is the watch itself, and I'll just go through the basics of this watch before explaining why I think this watch is such a fantastic watch for the money, and more to the point why it sits so well in that super-compressor style. So, the case of the watch is stainless steel, as you can see, and it combines brushed and polished finishes. Now, I really do apologise for the lighting today. It's a particularly dark day here in England, in your rural England, and my lighting has chosen the perfect day to pack up. So I'm afraid I'm just going to have to work with what I have today. So, the case, as I've said, is stainless steel, 316L stainless steel, with these polished bevels, as you can see. And then the majority of the case is brushed, so notably the sides of the case, as you can see here, with a longitudinal style brushing, and then brushing in a circular pattern around the top of the lugs, and that matches the bezel, the external bezel, that is. Again, if one tips the watch onto its side, one sees that there are also bevels which are polished here, and again, the majority of these edges here on the bottom of the case are also polished. The crowns are also polished, but I'll get into those in a second because they're particularly interesting. Now, sitting atop that is a very large, domed, mineral but sapphire-coated crystal. Now, that's an interesting choice. I haven't come across sapphire-coated crystals before, but in this case, I I suppose there are pros and cons. On the one hand, this crystal feels fantastic. It feels warm to the touch like acrylic, which is really what I would want on this watch. But of course, that has very little durability, though it can be repolished. And equally, the fact that mineral crystal is much more shock resistant than sapphire means that here you get the scratch resistance of sapphire, but the shock resistance of mineral, which is again a touch which is appreciated on a watch which is a dive watch at base. Now, the only problem, and this is I say the only, but it is quite a major problem, though it has a real charm of its own, is are the reflections on this crystal. The reflections are, well, for filming, catastrophic, but no, just generally they're very charming. They lend to a very vintage style to this watch, and mean this watch takes itself a little less seriously, I think, than a lot of watches do. It takes a very simple approach to this crystal with these little divots here, lending to a very appealing crystal, but definitely not one that's easy to fill. And as you can see me there in the reflection, and I believe that may well be one of the first times you've seen any of me. So yes, the crystal is something which is an acquired taste, I think. Some people will love it, some people will hate it. I personally like it a lot. Though here trying to film this video, I do notice the reflections far more than I did previously. Now, if we turn around to the back of the case, this is one of the reasons why I bought this watch, and it really is a touch which I think is absolutely magnificent. Now, before I talk about the main piece, we see it states Dan Henry 1970, so that's the name of the brand and the model, and then limited edition on the side. We again see my particular serial number out of the 1970 that were made. Stainless steel, automatic, and 200 meters and 600 feet water resistant. Sorry, 660 feet water resistant. Now, of course, in the middle of that case back, we see this wonderfully made sculpture, I suppose. I won't call it an engraving because it isn't really. It's three-dimensional, and sits very proud of the case back, as you can see. Now, of course, the edges are brushed, but what they have in the middle is what they call a scaphopus, so a play on words between octopus and a sort of scaff-style word, which references back to the equipment used by divers. There are a number of words with scaff in them that were used by divers, so I'm not sure which particular one they were using for this, but there we are. It's a fantastic engraving, and I think really lends to the beauty of this watch, and makes it something very different for the price of about $250. And again, behind this case back sits a Seiko movement, so really there's nothing to worry about there, but I'll get onto the movement in just a second. Now, another touch which I appreciate in the design of this case back is that they've used a sort of an octagonal style of case back and case back opener. So here you have these flat edges on the side of the case back, which can be then removed using a particular tool. And that means that one doesn't have the usual 6 holes placed in the back, which I believe detracts from the look of a watch. Now, this is something I've seen before on my Longines, for example, which has a similar style of case back, with again a type of engraving. So these two watches really do match rather nicely. Now again, the engraving of the writing is very deeply done, and I'm not sure if I can show you, but it definitely stands out and does have texture under the finger. Now, underneath the lugs, the case is polished, and then equally one can see the width of the strap here. I believe it says, if I can get that into focus, I'm not sure if you can quite read that, but 24 millimeters. And this does bring me on to one of the other points about this watch. It's very large, and I hesitate to say that it's on the large side on my wrist. My wrist really can take up to about a 43. This watch is a 44 millimeter diameter. That said, it has quite a short lug to lug distance, meaning that it does still sit on a wrist nicely. But one does have to bear in mind that this watch will sit quite high, and in terms of case width, will be rather large. Now, if we go on to the dial is, if anything, the most complex part of this watch, and really a beautiful touch. So they make 2 versions. This chapter ring here in grey with the minutes written on it, does in fact come in an orange as well, and that model comes with a matching orange second hand. Now, for me, I went for the grey version simply because I feel this watch will suit more occasions in black and grey, but it really is a matter of preference. Now, if I flip this over and try and get a close-up of the dial, you'll notice it's very highly textured. Now, though those loom plots, which are squared off, aren't metal rimmed, they are actually applied. They're applied blocks of loom, so they sit very proud of the dial, and one can see a clear difference in the height of those placed on that matte black dial. Sorry. Now we have the date at 3 o'clock, which is again a simple white date wheel, but does stand up rather nicely. And then the hands are very beautifully done because they have this this brushed segment on them. So as you see near the centre of the dial, they're brushed, and then they're painted for the rest of the hand. Notably, the centre of the hand isn't loomed, so one just has those loom blots along the edges. Now I will get onto loom, but I'll show you that after I've shown you the rest of the dial. Now, this grey chaptering is also very legible, and can easily be used to tell the minutes as the hand goes round, or the seconds. Now, then we come into the most interesting part of the dial, which is in fact this internal bezel. And this is, of course, why this watch is a super-compressor. But what one notices in a lot of watches is that super-compressors do have screw-down crowns. And the original super-compressors were made specifically not to have screw-down crowns, to have a mechanism whereby, as the depth increased and the pressure on the crowns and the caseback increased, the tightness of the seals would also increase to counter that, and therefore didn't require a screw-down system for the crowns. So as you can see here, this watch does actually follow this principle, unlike a lot of other watches. So both crowns are free to turn, as you can see, which is something which surprised me because I tried on a Longines Legend Diver, which is their super-compressor, and which is also a beautiful watch. I would encourage you to go and have a look at it if you haven't already. And that's a little bit smaller than this, but it doesn't have true super-compressor crowns. It has screw-down crowns, which disappointed me a little bit, because I personally feel that a vintage watch should be authentic to its original design, or its namesake, if you will. So the internal bezel rotates bidirectionally and is marked all the way around. Now these markers, again, that crystal does make it very difficult to show you, but they're raised above the matte black rest of the bezel, making them nice and legible at every point except 12 o'clock. Now there is the issue that when in bright light, the light is caught on the crystal and makes it very difficult to read that bezel, which can be a bit of a pain really when trying to read it in bright sunlight. And also that bezel isn't loomed, so in the dark one can't actually tell the time on the bezel. But it does rotate very satisfactorily in both directions, and there's really no play in the crown or the bezel. It will stay extremely firmly in place, which is a problem I've seen on a lot of real vintage super-compressors, that over the years their crowns and bezels have become loose. So here you can really appreciate the beauty of an original while enjoying the quality of modern technology. So again, it can be rotated back after being set, and the crowns do yield a great deal of grip and allow one to set the time and turn the bezel easily. Now on that note, the movement inside this is a Seiko NH-35. Now that's the same automatic movement that we've seen in the Grayton last week, and it's a very reliable hacking and hand winding automatic Seiko movement, which does offer great quality, and in this watch has been keeping impeccable time. For the last week it's been gaining 2 seconds a day, which is well within COSC chronometer certification, and I tried it out by putting in several positions during the night, and it still kept time perfectly. So I'm very impressed with the regulation. Whether that's luck or the watch itself, I don't know, but certainly the build quality of this watch and the quality of the movement really does shine through. Now the crown is, as I've said, not screw down, so one can simply pull it out like so. I'll just get my nail behind it, there we are. So in its first position it is, of course, a date. We'll, of course, adjust the date very easily, as you can see. In its second position, it will, in fact, there we are, hack. And of course, this allows one to set the date and time more easily and synchronize the time with other watches, which is something which one often sees neglected in a lot of watches around this price point. Notably, admittedly, they're being phased out. The SKX line from Seiko don't have hacking or hand winding, and the turtles that they're being replaced with cost about £100 more, and that's about £100 more than this watch itself. So they really are offering a lot with this wristwatch. Now, as you can see, again, then the adjustment of the hands is very easily done, and the crown then simply pops back in. But one touch which I really appreciated for its accuracy to the original styles of Super-Compressor are those crowns. Now, these hashed crowns, with that hashing on the front of the crown, on the top of the crown, denotes the fact that this watch is a true Super-Compressor, and that's because the original company which made the Super-Compressors, the Super-Compressor cases, used this as their sort of mark of authenticity, if you will, as their mark of waterproofing in this Super-Compressor fashion. So this really does show that Dan Henry, as a brand, are really showing their authenticity to the originals. Now, the strap this watch comes on is this very nice style of tropic rubber strap, and these have been seen on a number of watches. I'm sure you've seen it on the Oris Diver 65, which comes on a 20mm version of this style of strap, and this version is particularly supple. It's very comfortable on the wrist. Now, I don't know if it's silicone or natural rubber. It feels like silicone, if I'm honest, so I suspect it's silicone. But it's definitely very, very supple and comfortable in warm weather, due to the fact that it has these breathing holes and this design on the back, which means there's very little strapping contact with the wrist at one time, meaning that the wrist can breathe. Now, equally, I suppose these straps offer more adjustability than normal straps, on the basis that these holes run the whole length of the strap. That said, though, one can see a difference in the shape of the holes which are meant to be used and those which aren't, but there really shouldn't be a problem. Again, they have this very nice texture on the top, but actually at a distance this strap could easily pass for a leather strap, due to the way it hugs the wrist. So actually I think this watch could be worn under certain occasions as a dress piece, despite its size, which is something I don't often say about dive watches. Now, the buckle itself is a brushed and polished buckle. As you can see, it has the brushed front and main section of the buckle, and then the tang is polished. Again, we have DH for Dan Henry engraved into this, and then underneath we see the words, if I can get them into focus, stainless steel, showing this watch what is called stainless steel and shan't rust, because one does see a lot of straps where they have a sort of a brass and then painted or plated buckle, which ends up rusting and becoming very, well, not rusting, sorry, oxidizing, and tarnishing, which does detract from the look. Now, again, the writing on the dial is very minimalistic and very simple, notably simply having Dan Henry at 12 o'clock and then automatic 200 meters, 660 feet. Now, I particularly like the font used here because it really does look as though it was made in the era. It doesn't have a too modern aesthetic, and sticking to that fairly simple colour palette, it does give a very appealing look. Now, the interesting thing about this watch is that usually, for quality, one would look for applied indices and framing around the date window and particular touches like that. Here, I think the charm of the watch is in the fact that they've managed to make a watch look extremely high quality in person, without having these things. So notably, they've gone for a simple painted external square around the date window, which lends to a more simple, old-fashioned appeal, and doesn't try to be something modern, instead harks back to the original watches. Now, I'll just turn out the lights and be back with you for a loom shot to demonstrate how this watch is in the dark. So I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, so here we are. I've shined a torch, a UV torch to this watch for now 30 seconds, which gives roughly the same loom I've found brightness as if you had it over the cuff all day in the sunshine. So here you see that the dial itself is nicely loomed, though the hands themselves are quite difficult to see. Now they're much easier to see in real life. I must point out simply that in the camera, for some reason, it doesn't pick them up particularly well. Now I'm not sure quite why, but they certainly are much more legible in real life. Now around that, as you can see, that grey chapter ring is actually fully loomed, which does give the whole watch an interesting look, seeing as it's not something you wouldn't expect to be loomed, but does increase legibility incredibly, and makes this watch really very legible at a glance. Now I'm not sure if you can see this, but the depth of the dial is also immediately visible. So one can see that the normal indices sit higher up on the dial than the chapter ring or that internal bezel, which does mean that you get this very interesting sort of look as you move the watch around, which personally I think looks absolutely wonderful. Now that internal bezel isn't actually loomed, which is a bit of a problem, but as far as aesthetics go, having those polished indices on it really do look wonderful, as opposed to loom. So I'll just turn the lights back on and be right back with you. Now, as I just show you some more angles of this watch, I'd like to talk about something which does interest me rather a bit, and this is the origin of Dan Henry. Now, Dan Henry are a brand which was founded by Dan Henry, a watch collector, and he has his own website about his own vintage timepiece collection, which is very interesting, and I'll put a link down below. But it really does shine through that someone who has collected vintage watches has designed this watch, because it has so many cues which are so iconic of watches of the time, and really shows that he has a real understanding of these designs. Now, something else I'd like to say is that I have been in contact with their customer service just with regards to servicing in future, just to ask a few questions, nothing major, and also because this watch made a slight tapping noise. And they cleared up the question. It's just the rotor in the back of the movement, which is it just makes that noise. I should have checked with my other Seiko movemented watches, but they make a very similar noise, so nothing to worry about. What I wanted to comment on was how good their customer service was. I sent an email, and within 18 hours, they'd sent me back a very comprehensive email explaining all the queries I had, and giving me a very complete answer, which I think is fantastic to see in a small brand, because I've seen often in smaller brands their customer service does lack, and they simply don't have the manpower to deal with the job. Whereas here one sees a brand which is really trying to appeal to its customers and help one. So that's just something I wanted to comment on with regards to this watch, because I know that's very important to many people, as it is to myself. When I buy a watch, I want to know that it will be supported by the brand. Right, so now I'd like to show you the watch on my wrist. Having forgotten in several reviews, and I do apologise for that, I think it is important for me to show it on the wrist, because one really doesn't understand a watch fully until one's seen it actually being worn. So here is the watch on my wrist, and as you can see, it sits very comfortably. Now it sits quite high on the wrist, as you can see, with those lugs hanging down. But actually only the case back makes contact with the wrist, and is generally a very comfortable watch to wear. Now it was one of my fears, when I bought this watch, that this watch would actually be too large for me. But luckily that wasn't a problem, as I actually have very slim wrists, but as it turns out, this watch fits in very nicely because of the fact that the lugs hang down and wrap around the wrist very nicely. Equally, that domed crystal, despite being a bit of a pain when trying to film, and equally having the issue of some reflectivity issues in the field, it does slip under the cuff very easily and very comfortably, and doesn't make this watch a pain to wear at all. If anything, I'd rather have a high crystal than a high bezel, because whereas a bezel will catch, the crystal will simply slip under the cuff. Now, as I end, I would like to make a point of the fact that if I haven't mentioned it already, I'm afraid I can't remember. That this watch, this review wasn't in any way paid for or anything. I bought this watch myself, because I think it's a beautiful watch and one which I shall definitely treasure. And this is going to go into my keeper section of the collection, because actually I enjoy wearing this watch too much to part with it in future. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And do please like, share, and subscribe if you did enjoy this video, to see more content on this channel, and to help me run the channel. So thank you very, very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.